finally gave me approval, because I still remember where I was sitting, because I screamed to the watch commander, mark the time, because I finally got approval to bring in the National Guard.
Well, again, thank you for your service. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Now recognize myself for 5 minutes for the purpose of asking questions. Chief Son, since January 6, 2021, have you testified or been asked to testify publicly before a committee of the House of Representatives?
No, sir.
Did the January 6th Select Committee ask you to publicly testify before their committee?
No, sir.
But you did testify in the Senate, correct?
Yes, sir. The Senate combined hearing, I think it was February 23rd.
Can you briefly tell us about that?
It was a combined hearing. I think it was a really good approach of, how to come in and address it. Initially, they did not want anybody that was no longer in their position to testify, which would have excluded myself, Senate Sergeant Arms Stenger, and House Sergeant Arms Irving. And I went and specifically asked the Senate Rules Committee, please let me come and testify. I will testify in person, to show up. They changed the rules and allowed me to show up.
So you had to basically force yourself in to even be able to testify before the Senate committee.
I had to call in somebody I knew there and tell them, I promise you, I will show up in person. I was the only one to be there in person, not on video.
Thank you for your vigilance there. Chief Son, you previously testified on January 3rd, 2020, or on January 3, 2021, 3 days before January 6th, you met separately with House Sergeant at Arms Paul Irving and Senate Sergeant at Arms Michael Stenger. And you asked them to approve a request for National Guard assistance on the 6th. Now, this is on January the 3rd. I believe this was in your book that you met with both Stenger and Irvin and requested National Guard assistance to be ready on the 6th. Can you explain what happened in those two meetings with Irving and Stenger?
Absolutely. So on the morning of the 3rd at 9:24 a.m., I specifically went to see him because I know what a big deal it is to have National Guard come and assist us on the Hill. I went into his office again, 9:24 in the morning, went up and immediately went up and said, hey, I'd like to bring in the National Guard to support me.
Good, buddy. How you doing? It's good to see you.
Because when we have a joint session of Congress,
We just started to stream this. Hoping a couple more people will join, and I got to go make some coffee. I'll be back.
I don't know. I don't like the optics of that. And his second response was, besides, the intelligence doesn't support it. He immediately, then we began talking. He said, have you reached out to Mike Stenger on this? I said, no, I have not talked to him about it yet. He said, why don't you talk to Stenger and see what he has to say? So then I left, went over to Mike Stinger's office at 9:35 in the morning, walked into his office. He wasn't there. I came back. He showed up at 11:13. I showed back up at 11:53 and went in to immediately ask him, I'd like to request the National Guard. He said, let's come up with another idea. Why don't you do you know somebody at the National Guard? I said, yes, sir, I know General William Walker. He said, why don't you call Walker and see if we need them, how quickly could they get here, and how many people could they send us? So I called William Walker 6:14 p.m. that night. He told me they have 125 people assisting with COVID response. He could reallocate those fairly quickly once he got Secretary of Defense approval and send them over.
Okay. When you met with Stenger, had Irvin given him heads up that you were coming to ask for National Guard?
Yeah, later on, after January 6th, specifically on April 8th, I went and had lunch with Mike Stenger. And I asked him, because it was kind of unusual. He came up with that idea so quickly when I went walking in. And I asked him, I said, Mr. Stenger, you came up with that response fairly quickly for me to call General Walker. And he had told me Paul Irving had called him ahead of time and said, son came here asking for the National Guard. We got to come up with another plan. Pelosi will never go for it. I was floored by him saying that.
Okay, so you don't know, I know this word optics has come up several times in the past or in different contexts. Do you know if Irvin had discussed that with Stenger, if what a possible response would be?
I have no idea, sir.
All right. Around 2 p.m. on January 6th, you joined a call with Metropolitan Police Department Chief Conte and National Guard representatives. According to Chief Conte's transcribed testimony given to the Select Committee, you asked the National Guard to send assistance on that call, and he didn't hear the military people respond to your plea. Is that what you remember?
No, he heard clearly the military respond to my plea and say they recommended against my request for the National Guard. Robert Conte immediately butted in and said, let me get this right. You're denying the chief of the Capitol Police? And again, he just, I can go farther into that if you want.
Okay, thank you. Are you familiar with the term data miner?
I have become familiar with it, yes.
Yeah, and according to a book by Carol Lenning, General Milley was using this tool and reached out to Senator Angus King, warning him about violent rhetoric for January 6th. Some of the intelligence included references to smuggling guns and other weapons into D.C. One message said, let's burn Senator McConnell's house down while he's in it. Another one, seemingly addressed to members who supported certifying the election, said, we're coming to kill you. Just wait a few days. Did General Milley ever reach out to you and share these concerns with you of any of this intelligence?
No, sir.
Do you know if he reached out to either of the sergeant at arms?
I have no idea, sir.
Would this intelligence have helped the Capitol Police prepare for January 6th?
Absolutely.
Okay. With that, I do have several other questions, but it seems we have a second round. At this time, I'll recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Stahl, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Loudermilk, for hosting today's hearing. Thank you, Chief Sund, for being here today. Members of the committee and Congress are thankful for your prior service to the U.S. Capitol Police and your commitment to protecting members, staff, and visitors. My priority as chairman of the Committee on House Administration is to depoliticize Capitol Police. I'm committed to ensuring the U.S. Capitol Police has the tools, resources, and leadership it needs to keep our community safe. I also remain committed to supporting our law enforcement officers and the work they do each day. Today, we're here to discuss the security failures that occurred on January 6, 2021, and how we can prevent these failures from occurring again. I want to dive into the questions, Chief Sund. In your transcribed interview, you mentioned that you met with the House Sergeant at Arms regarding the National Guard prior to January 6th. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And who was the House Sergeant at Arms leading up to and on January 6th?
That would be Paul Irving.
And the House Sergeant at Arms is appointed by who?
It was appointed at that time by Speaker Pelosi.
And in your transcribed interview, you mentioned that when you first brought up the National Guard to the House Sergeant at Arms in the days leading up to January 6th, that Mr. Irving said he, quote, didn't like the optics, end quote. Is that correct?
That is correct. He referenced being concerned for optics.
And on January 6th, when you went to Mr. Irving to get his approval to call in the Guard, Mr. Irving said he would, quote, run it up the chain. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That was a telephone call. I didn't see him in person when I first made that request.
The House Sergeant at Arms is considered probably the most senior security official on the House side. When Mr. Irving says he has to, quote, run it up the chain, end quote, what did that mean?
I took that to mean his leadership chain.
And who would be his leadership chain?
It would
If
be
he's functionally the most senior security official on the House side, correct?
that's his title. That's part of the title, the senior law enforcement official for the House of Representatives. But he would have been referring to the leadership team that goes up to Speaker Pelosi.
So the political leadership team, meaning elected officials, not another security official. Is that your
That
understanding?
is correct, sir. He's the top security official for the House.
So running up the chain would most likely, in your opinion, is through the Speaker's office and possibly to Speaker Pelosi?
That would be where it ends, yes.
Okay, so let's park that there, and then let's jump to a second set here. In a press conference on January 7th, Speaker Pelosi called for your resignation on national television. Speaker Pelosi also stated that she had not talked to you since the initial breach of the Capitol. But according to your transcribed interview, you were on the phone with Speaker Pelosi a few times. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, that is correct. I spoke to Speaker Pelosi 3 times that evening, and she went on national TV and said I'd never spoken to her, but I spoke to her 3 times. The three times were the first time when I went over to brief Vice President Pence at the secure location. I'd called House Sergeant at Arms Irving, told him I was going over to brief the Vice President. I was also going over to do a personal assessment of the Capitol. At that point, things were getting under control. Went over there, briefed him on when we can get them back into chambers with Mr. Irving being fully aware. He said he wanted to get Speaker Pelosi on the phone. He made a phone call from his cell phone at approximately 5:34, where I first briefed Speaker Pelosi. The second call was when I left that location. As I was walking away, I met up with Mr. Stenger, and we started walking over to the Senate to go brief the Senate. When Jennifer Hemingway, I believe it was Jennifer Hemingway, handed me the cell phone, and it was Emily Barrett's cell phone calling her, and it was Speaker Pelosi on the other line. This is my second call with Speaker Pelosi, questioning the information I'd given to Vice President Pence about when we can get back into chambers. I assured her that information was correct. I could get them back into chambers by 7 p.m., and the call ended. That was call number 2. Call number 3 was 6:25 p.m. I was over at the Senate from the secure location, from where the Senate had been sequestered, and on a cell phone using Robert Karam's cell phone, they dialed leadership, who was over off-site at a secure location, and I briefed all of the leadership of the plans to get them back into chambers. That would have been call number 3 with Speaker Pelosi.
So you didn't have one call, you didn't have 2 calls, you had 3 calls. So Speaker Pelosi's comments that she didn't speak to you are inaccurate.
That is correct, sir.
Let me shift gears and go back.
Typical demonstration, a First Amendment demonstration on Capitol Hill, such as the Women's March. Pink hats and came out and marched against some of the efforts of the president. What you did not anticipate, none of you anticipated, that a Republican member of Congress would tell the crowd on stage, today is the day American patriots start taking down names and kicking ass, and our ancestors sacrificed their blood, their sweat, their tears, their fortunes, and sometimes their lives. Are you willing to do the same? You didn't anticipate that, did you?
We anticipated some minor skirmishes. We did not anticipate.
But you didn't
a
anticipate a Republican member of Congress to go on stage and incite the crowd like this. You also didn't anticipate the president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, to tell this, mob that was armed, trial by combat. You also didn't anticipate the President of the United States telling an armed mob to march to the Capitol and that to start walking to the Capitol. You could not have anticipated any of that, did you?
Well, knowing now that there is
Of course
intelligence.
not. And I believe when you say that, sir, because I do not believe that anyone in charge of the men and women that serve us here in the U.S. Congress, if they had known any of that intelligence, would have acted very differently than we did that day. But I still want you to know that I am grateful for my life, that I am grateful that the officers used their own bodies to protect us, that they bravely fought against these very angry rioters who came here to do violence, to hang the vice president. This past weekend, the former president has said he would pardon those convicted, the ones convicted of crimes associated with January 6th, including individuals like Enrique Tarrio, the leader of the Proud Boys, who was convicted of seditious conspiracy and sentenced to 22 years in prison. Mr. Sun, how does that make you feel to hear that the former president talks about pardoning defendants who assaulted your officers during that violent attack and assault on our democracy?
Again, I feel if they assaulted the officers, they need to pay the consequences.
I feel really badly for everything that has happened since the officers, the suicides. No one deserved that. I wanted to really stay focused on who to blame, who is to blame for everything that happened on January 6th. And I attended this peaceful transfer of power on this inauguration when this president took the oath to serve this country and to protect, the rule of law and democracy. I also attended, by the way, I was not wearing a vest at this ceremony because Democrats did not incite a crowd and say those Russians that interfere in our election, were at fault for us losing. We took the loss and we did the right thing by ensuring that we had a peaceful power of transfer. Unfortunately, when I attended Mr. Biden's inauguration, I had to wear a vest because I no longer felt safe. With that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. I now yield to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith, for 5 minutes.
So, Mr. Sund, you also did not anticipate that you wouldn't get significant intelligence about the threat. Isn't that true?
That is correct. With the intelligence,
You would have anticipated that either your own department or other federal agencies would have alerted